And Police Minister Chris Hipkins is with me this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, I guess the first question I would have is, what is your personal definition of a gang member?
Well, someone who's a patched gang member, the definition is clear. One of the things that we have to do as we work our way through the legislative process here is define what the outer rim of that is, if you like, what the outer edge of being involved in a gang is, so that we can be clear in the definition. There isn't a current definition in law, so there are certain activities around gangs that are currently defined in law. So patched members, for example, we've identified who we regard some gangs to be. But that question around whether you're wearing a patch or not, or whether you're an identified patch member or not, there's still a bit more legal definition work to be done there.
Okay. Let's just briefly touch on some of the legislation. So it's already an offence to discharge a firearm recklessly. So how does this close the loophole that you spoke of yesterday?
The discharging of a firearm to intimidate is currently limited to if you're doing that inside a dwelling. The issue here is that you can be charged with discharging a firearm recklessly. The penalty for that is not a particularly big one. This is the offence that we introduced yesterday, which is discharging a firearm to intimidate, has a potential 5-year prison sentence. So it's putting it to the more serious end of potential offending, and it is closing a loophole in the law at the moment. That means that police don't have the tools that they need to target the drive-by shootings, for example, that we've seen in recent times.
I mean, these are kind of the laws I think the public's been calling out for, because there is a sense that gang warfare, if I can even say that, is out of control, not just in Auckland, but also here in Christchurch. But I'm just trying to work out if it actually would do anything to stop gangs or limit gang activity. For example, you speak about the legislation would allow police to search gangs if they were responding to gang conflict. I mean, what is the definition of gang conflict?
Well, it's where harm is imminent. So in the case of the Auckland gang conflict that we've just seen recently, that would clearly meet the definition. And what police would be able to do in those circumstances, we've got two gangs, in conflict with one another, escalating tensions. It's clear that there is, that there's likely to be, further offending behaviour in the near future. It will give the police the ability to get a warrant that will give them much greater search powers for up to 14 days in order to go in and disrupt that conflict. And that's a practical power that will make a difference in helping police to do their jobs.
Watches, jewellery, this was interesting. Motor vehicles and boats will be added to the list of high-value goods prohibited for sale for cash over a specific value. What does that mean?
Well, look, most of us aren't walking around with briefcases with $10,000 stuffed in them in order to go and buy a new car or go and buy some expensive jewellery. We're using electronic transactions. And the reality is, from a law enforcement perspective, cash transactions are very difficult for police to be able to monitor, and it is a way that the gangs are are laundering their money, and so we want to be able to put a stop to that. If you think about the illegal activities that gangs are undertaking, drugs are a really clear example of that. Helping to stop the cash, the cash economy that underpins that illegal activity. It's not going to penalise regular law-abiding New Zealanders who, will use, an electronic transaction for these big purchases, but it will stop the gangs laundering their money.
I was thinking about some of the cases that we've had in Christchurch, and thank goodness in some respects the gang conflict is between themselves, and people who are being hurt are either gang members or gang associates, not general members of the public. For now, thank goodness. But how would all this legislation, while it's well intended, how would it stop this type of conflict though?
I mean, let's be clear, there is no silver bullet, there is no magic solution that's going to stop gang offending overnight. The reality is gangs are very sophisticated organisations, and so we need a sophisticated response to combating that. The measures that we announced yesterday, not one of those on its own is going to make a massive difference, but collectively they give the police more tools in the operations that they've got underway to combat gang activity, to disrupt that gang activity. I also want to be clear here. I don't just want to force the gang offending underground. We actually want to force the criminal part of gang activity out of the community altogether. And some of the other proposals we've seen have suggested that if people can't see it anymore, and it's just between gangs, then it doesn't matter. Actually, the activities that gangs are undertaking are causing massive damage to our society and to other people who aren't members of gangs. The drugs that they are peddling, for example, cause enormous harm, and so we should be targeting their offending.
Your colleague yesterday said prevention for young people is the best tool, and you're working on early intervention for at-risk youths. What do you mean by that? Because there is this perception, rightly or wrongly, that we've got a certain section of the population that is completely and utterly out of control.
Well, I think we've got a section of the population, of the young population, that are disengaged, and that is a concern. They're not going to school regularly. They're not engaged in constructive, useful things that make a contribution to society, and they are far more likely to end up on a pathway to crime and potentially ultimately to prison. And we can do more to intervene there earlier, to provide them with more support and to get them back on the straight and narrow. We can get those kids back to school, and we've got a whole program of work around getting them re-engaged in education. But we can also get them engaged in things outside of school that make a difference as well. So sometimes getting them hooked into club sport or some other activity that means that they're constructively engaged is one of the ways that we can keep them out of trouble. And that chokes off the supply of new recruits for the gangs, for example.
I thought you were going to say get them into clubs. Anyway, just finally, Minister, I know you've got to go. National said since 2017 there has been a 21% increase in violent crime, nightly ram raids and gang members conducting drive-by shootings. Firearms offences is out of control under Labour. Are they right in that respect? And is part of this a little bit political because there is this perception, rightly or wrongly, that crime under Labour has skyrocketed?
Well, you can choose your statistics when talking about this. Reported crime in those areas has increased. If you look at the victimisation survey that's done regularly, actually the overall level of crime in New Zealand hasn't increased, but the level of reporting to police has. Now, on one level, you could say that's encouraging because police, can therefore do more if crime is reported to them. We've seen an increase in domestic violence, for example, that's being reported to police. That's a good thing. It means that people aren't willing to turn a blind eye to it anymore. But the causes of the offending, particularly in some of the violent end of the offending, are many and varied and more complicated. So the work that we're doing around mental health will make a difference here because we know that mental health is one of the drivers behind some of that violent offending. The work that we've been doing to get firearms off the streets, out of the hands of gang members, that is going to make a big difference. It hasn't made a difference overnight because we're still only partway through that program of work. That's a big project, but it is going to make a difference.
I hope so. Police Minister Chris Hipkins, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Chris.